capitalist profit, quote unquote, or interest comes from, and why the worker and landlord are willing to pay it. Now, so this is just pure. This is even in the world of certainty. This is even in no change, no risk. The second thing, of course, the capitalist provides is he pays the money now and takes the risk. In a real world of certainty, you have a situation where you produce the SL car, nobody buys it, or whatever. So there's a tremendous risk. And the entrepreneur or businessman becomes the major uncertainty bearer. The worker and the landlord get the money now, are relieved of this uncertainty. They get the payment right now, and the entrepreneur takes upon himself on his shoulders the burden of this uncertainty or the risk. So what you have then is return on capital, the business return, is divided at least conceptually into two parts. There's long-run profit or normal natural profit or natural interest, which is something like 8% or whatever it is. Again, it's very difficult to spot it empirically. Okay? It's the natural interest of time preference. And there's profit for successful forecasting, pure profit, it's called, plus losses or minus losses if the guy is a lousy entrepreneur. Okay. So this is the risk component, the uncertainty component, the profit, pure profit and loss, which is sort of on top of, it's a vector on top of the natural rate of interest. So I think this is a useful analysis. Even though we never get to final equilibrium, by talking about equilibrium where there's no change or no uncertainty, we can then separate out conceptually what the capitalist return will be on pure time preference and what it is on profit and risk and uncertainty. So that's the analysis, the illustrated analysis of where this returns on capital come from. Orthodox economics is sort of grudgingly accepted some of the time preference, but not very much. Certainly not this time market analysis. Wow. So the fact that the cost curves are not the same, is that you can't prove the tangency at all that, I think is enough to scuttle the perfect competition people. And also the fact, of course, there never is a situation. We're never in equilibrium. That's another interesting point. And so in the real world, there's always profits and losses and whatever, and there's no way you can compare tangencies. There ain't no tangencies. Even if there was smooth curves, there wouldn't be any tangencies. It'd be somewhere like here, whatever. And nothing can be true one way or the other. One interesting thing, the ones around cost curves, is that I like to deal with total cost and total revenue anyway, so I think it makes more sense as average stuff. But at any rate, the cost curve is defined. You have a usual total cost curve. When you start with zero, you produce nothing, it doesn't cost you anything, presumably, if you're not in business. So the usual cost curve is depicted as something like that. It's a total cost. What happens, this assumes, of course, if you take any given production, you're producing 10,000 loaves of Wonder Bread, the possible costs are infinite. If you want to keep raising your cost, you can do it. So what this really is an envelope of the minimum total cost, of what's the absolute minimum that you can produce the stuff for. So because your returns, your profits, is equal to total revenue minus total cost. You're interested in keeping the difference as high as possible. And getting the total cost as low as possible. So what you have is sort of a whole bunch of possible costs. And the market economy forces businessmen, so to speak, to keep them as low as possible. However, if you're looking at a firm which doesn't have these rigors of the free market. Take, for example, a firm which specializes in government contracts. There's a very different situation now occurs. The government contracts, at least in the United States, are so-called cost-plus contracts. Okay, fella, you want to buy paper clips from you, or dams, or missiles, or whatever it happens to be. We will pay you cost, whatever your cost is, plus guaranteed profit of 8% or 10% or whatever. Now notice what this means. Cost plus means any cost which would be in any way justified. Well, if it comes to your interest then for your cost to start ballooning upward, if you're a business and you want your cost to balloon upward, it's very easy to do it. Very easy. Just let them float. And the government, the taxpayer, pays up the difference, gives you a guaranteed margin on top of that. What the hell? Why not? And so you have all sorts of things happening where in war contract and defense contract firms, there's so-called hoarding of labor. Okay. if you're an engineering firm, if you're producing stuff for the U.S. government, if you're a private firm, let's say you hire 50 engineers, why not hire 150? What the hell? You may as well keep them 100 sitting around idly and then have a peak week where they all work like mad and sick, drop back to playing poker the other 51 weeks a year. Because the cost that you pay for it can be just incorporated into the bill that you give to the Pentagon or whatever other department of government. And they'll pay you the guaranteed cost plus the profit. So the cost then, talking about wasted resources, I mean, these people are worrying about the tangency on the cost curve. This is a real, the real problem. And so this is the problem of cost with the thing. You can do all sorts of stuff. You can, for example, usually in the paper for engineers, full-page ads are taken out. We even want engineers in California, and so forth. Well, these ads you see are recouped by the government. In other words, this is a reasonable cost. You can show the Defense Department, hey, we need advertising for engineers, and just recoup it. So why not? You know, sky's the limit. Anything which the suckers in the government will grant you, you'll include as part of your cost. And then, of course, there's the cozy interaction. I talked about antitrust lawyers before, that in the Pentagon, for example, retire at full pay, whatever it is, an insane amount after 20 years service, in general. You then become vice president in charge of procurement, in charge of sales, for Lockheed or Boeing or something, selling the same planes and missiles to your old buddies in the Defense Department. And this is a sort of recirculating thing, I'm saying. And this is everybody washes everybody's back for arrangement, except for the taxpayer, the consumer, whatever else you can work back. Any comments on this? Point? Sure.
Do you have a similar analysis for the medical profession?
Yeah.
Because, like, I'm involved in medical insurance and stuff. It seems to me that it's not for any given procedure it's cost plus, although to some extent it is. It's just a question of once you have a different set of people paying for things as they're getting benefits, then you get very strange effects.
Absolutely.
There seems to be no limit on the demand as far as the medical profession is concerned, and whatever they bill is paid, and the cost to the consumers is very low.
Precisely, you just hit it. You look at the inflation record and so forth, you see the last year's 5% or something, medical costs 15%. Medical is always skyrocketing, much higher than regular inflation rates. Why is that? Well, you have two things going on. It's not quite the same. It all washes out. It just says like third-party cost. Supply. This is since 1910 in the United States. Supply is severely restricted by the government. Each state government coordinated with the federal government. So this is the demand curve, the supply curve. Supply is pushed way upward and to the left. This is the real problem of monopoly. There's all this nonsense about cost curve of General Motors. This is the pushed way upward because the government steps in and excludes people from being doctors. Very simple operations. Licensing requirement, especially the requirement of licensing hospitals. The requirement comes in, you can only be a practicing physician if you were graduated from a certified hospital, or certified medical school. And the government, I think what happened is in 1910, this whole thing swept in, 1910 to 14, the government put out of business, the state governments in the United States put out of business literally half the hospitals in the country, half the medical schools in the country. It's like that. You're not qualified, you're deficient, etc., etc.
The AMA helped.
AMA, right. Well, the whole thing is put through by the AMA in collaboration with the government. And the state, like New York State, for example, will turns over the New York State has a hospital licensing board, where they call it, they staff it with AMA people. They ask the AMA to staff it. The AMA, of course, is very happy to do this. And they put on these crazy requirements. They cut the quota. Each medical school will have a severe quota. They'll only, whatever. They only have 40% of the doctors will apply, or admitted, and all that sort of stuff. If you want to be a medical school, admitted. They cut the number of doctors enormously, cut the number of hospitals, and of course, as time goes on, very, very quickly, supply is cut severely to the left, and the price goes up. And when the physicians were pushing for this, they admitted it. They said, This is an economic problem, not just a medical problem. You need more. The doctors are not getting a sufficient standard of living. I don't know what sufficient was to mean. Sufficient to what they would like to become accustomed. And so, sure enough, the number of doctors per person in the United States is now half of what it was in 1910, or whatever. And the whole, this whole thing follows. And interestingly enough, the parts of the medical profession which are the most restrictive, the most monopolistic in that sense, are those most tied to hospitals. So that the more hospital-oriented the doctor is, the more monopoly gains he's getting. Surgeons, for example, of course, totally hospital-oriented, they're getting most of the benefit. If you look at the guys who run the American Medical Association, they're all surgeons. Why are they all surgeons? Are surgeons better people? How come there are no internists or dermatologists? They're all surgeons, because the surgeons are the guys who are getting a lion's share of this stuff. They're totally based on the hospital. And access to the hospital is the key. On the other hand, psychoanalysts would hardly have anything to do with hospitals. They're much less monopolistic. They have much less this kind of supply curve cut to the left, shift to the left. And one of the things that being hospital-oriented does, by the way, is that you're allowed to price discriminate. There's nothing wrong with price discrimination necessarily, but surgeons, for example, can do that because there's no competition, very little competition. Price discriminate meaning you find out what for any given appendix operation, you find out what the income of the guy is, and you sock him accordingly. So the wealthy patient pays much more through the nose, through the appendix, than the middle-class patient. Psychoanalysts don't do that because they have a hospital orientation. It may do a little bit. It's peanuts or dentists. And dentists is essentially the same price for every patient. They haven't got the opportunity for this hospital monopoly. At any rate, so that's one thing. And then, of course, as you said, there's a demand curve thing. But medical insurance, either governmental or private, third-party insurance, the insurer repays any medical cost plus, except for $100, whatever it is. They repay anything. Doctor charges. Well, how do you have like an unlimited infinite demand curve? It's heaven for the doctor, right? Charge of anything, and the insurance company pays off. What the hell? Patient doesn't care. Got insurance, and so as a result, people who are not insured, a few people here and there, the interstices of society get the shaft.
Oh, the insurance companies can only pay what they take in, so it's everybody's getting the shaft.
Yeah, of course. They distribute the costs.
In fact, you get situations where I remember doctors telling me at 2 o'clock in the morning on Saturday night, people come into the outpatient areas of a hospital because they're sunburned. He sprays them with Novocaine. He says, why didn't you go to the drugstore and get a can of solar cane? That's all you needed. Mm-hmm. They say, that costs $4. This is free.
Exactly. Right. So you have so-called shortage of hospitals comes in. That's exactly it's the same stuff. Another thing that happened when half the medical schools were put out of business, there was a warfare within the medical profession, so-called allopathy in those days, which is now called homeopaths and others. The allopaths have now, of course, taken over, are now our medicine. Took the opportunity, not, by the way, coincidentally, to totally crush the homeopaths. Most of the medical schools were put out of business were homeopath medical schools. And, well, it's sort of interesting. I know it's only tangential, but the homeopath I find fairly lovable. I'm not going to take sides between them. Homeopath is certainly much more lovable. Because they obviously can't hurt anybody. I mean, even the allopaths sort of admit that. In other words, you go to the homeopath. The only people around the only homeopaths are either European emigres who still have homeopaths here, and people over the age of 80.
Yeah. There's an article, we have about 10 of them left in Ontario, and a bunch of them are retired.
Yeah.
And,
what is a homeopath?
Well, extremely lovable.
Basically, they give very, very small doses of things, and they attempt to give what the body needs, small doses, and only one dose.
Teeny, very teeny. Well, here's the thing. So you go into the homeopath. Homeopath's got millions of different little bottles. I know this elderly lady from Austria who's went to a homeopath. Who has this little teeny little bottles and teeny little doses. All right. And the homeopath sits there and talks to you at a great length because the theory is that your personality, each different personality gets different little herbs, different homeopathic things. It means the doctor has to spend a lot of time with you, which is refreshing in itself. So, just say, okay, take 3 doses of this and come back in 2 weeks. You got to sit and talk to you and say, you know, are you a nervous type or are you optimistic or whatever. And in accordance with your personality type, it gives you different teeny little herbs. Now, teeny little herbs obviously can't hurt. It's pretty clear. Even the allopaths admit that. They just say it's a racket because it doesn't help anybody. Well, a lot of people say they're helped by it. Who am I to say they're not helped by it? Right? And also, it's very almost costless because you get this damn thing. The teeny little bottles, I mean, you know, $5 worth of a teeny little bottle takes 5 years of treatment. So it's practically almost zero cost for the medicine. And pharmacists hate it. And even more than that, they're cheap because they're natural herbs. You know, to pick them out of the ground or something. They're very cheap. They're teeny doses and they're cheap. And whereas the allopath specializes in synthetic drugs, which are extremely expensive, have to be manufactured by drug companies. Okay? So you have a whole different economic culture involved here. The allopath, go to an allopath. I mean, for example, I know a friend of mine, I haven't seen in a few years, they have diabetes quite severely, and they're getting heavy doses of insulin. He went to an old homeopath, because there are only old homeopaths. The guy said, here's this little bottle, okay, it's 5 years worth of doses. Throw away the insulin, because this will cure you. And they threw away insulin, and been in great shape ever since. I'm not saying this will work for every diabetic. I'm saying it costs them next to nothing. And one visit to the homeopath, and $3 for 5 years worth of stuff. So doctors hate it, drug companies hate it, people invest in drug companies hate it, pharmacists hate it. All right? So these people were literally put out of business. At the time, in 1910, they were considered equally respectable with the allopath. It was a fierce competition. And the allopaths then turned to the government, put these other guys out of business.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Am I right in assuming the allopaths are like the regular doctors?
Yeah, they're like now called physicians. Right. Now, there's another aspect of this, which I'm particularly interested in, being an economist and interested in the economic aspect of history, so to speak. Namely, who benefits? I'm always interested in that question. Who benefits by government action, for example? Well, obviously, the allopaths benefit, but who else? Okay, you have a situation, the report comes in 1910, there's a Flexner report, which said, written by an extremely beloved figure named Dr. Abraham Flexner, who was not a physician or an educator. He writes this big report on medical education, saying, putting out of business in a sense, because his advice was followed by all the state governments, put out of business by, put up as all the allopath and everybody else. So who was he? How does he come? He was a principal. He was a headmaster of some high school. Okay? No training in medicine, no nothing. Why does he become the guy who writes this big report? Well, because the report was financed by the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, especially the Rockefeller Foundation. And his brother, Dr. Simon Flexner, who was a doctor, was one of the big shots of the Rockefeller Foundation. Okay? Again, the pattern begins to emerge for those of us who are pattern-oriented. Or as a friend of mine says, I don't believe in the accidental theory of history. I don't believe that life is random. So the Rockefeller family has heavily invested in drug companies, synthetic drug companies. They're very heavily invested in it. All right? The Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research poured an enormous amount of money into drug research. It's not called something else, like Rockefeller Foundation or something. And then so you have an interesting pattern where the allopaths put the homeopaths out of business. The allopaths then specialize in Rockefeller drug company products. And so I think that's interesting. It's a pattern of whatever business medical cooperation through the government. It's cartelism. It's whatever. I think it works most of the time. As we get back to the discussion I had with Mary Lou last night about what's responsible for statism. I don't think it's altruism. I think it's this sort of thing. It's precisely this sort of operation. We use the government to get patronage, to put the other guys, your competitors, out of business, and all that sort of stuff. And it's known now as a government-business partnership. Anyway, so I should give you one more example. I realize it's tangential. It's a beautiful example. I love it. It's from New York City milk problem. The early 1930s, we were in the Big Depression. And those days, most milk was sold by local farmers in local grocery stores, and they came in big cans, right? Huge cans. Yeah. And they were poured out to the consumer. You go to the grocery store, a mom and pop store, it wasn't a supermarket. The guy ladles it out. We bring the bottle and give you out the milk. There was also Borden and Sheffield, who were the two bottle companies, bottled milk. Borden and Sheffield cost about twice as much as the other milk, so-called loose milk. Well, Borden, everybody was sort of suffering during the Depression. And the New York City Health Department one day decided, nope, they said loose milk is unsafe. We have spoken, it's unsafe. And the farmers say, it's not unsafe, nobody's been sick, you can't prove it. Well, they'll appoint a committee. It's always a big thing. I know what it is here, probably the same thing. Appoint a committee. Experts will decide whether loose milk is unsafe. They appointed a committee. The committee was 7 people. I have it at home. I have a little data on them. I'm fascinated by this. Of the committee, one guy was a big shot of the Borden Company. Another guy was a big shot of Sheffield Company. And 3 others were big shots of the Milbank Fund, independent truth-seeking foundation. They meet for a few months. They come to the conclusion loose milk is unsafe, it's got to be outlawed, post haste, pronto. And the farmers saying, no, it's ridiculous, you haven't included anything. And they said, look, the only thing you might possibly say is that the dipper that they dip in is not sterile. We're now working on a sterile dipper. In 3 months we have a sterile dipper and you can't say anything. They said, too late, tough, and loose milk is outlawed. Loose milk was outlawed in New York City, the price immediately doubled. The supply curve was tremendously to the left, and the price doubles, and poor people can't afford the milk, etc. This is the so-called New Deal. It's part of one of the aspects of the New Deal in the United States. Welfare state in action. Beginnings of the welfare state. So, okay, who's the Milbank Fund? You know about Borden and Sheffield. And the New York City Health Department, probably to this day, has a record. The heads of it and the vice chairman of it are always in and out of the Milbank Fund. In other words, the head of the New York City Health Department is the former vice president of the Milbank Fund. He's there for 3 years. He goes back to the Milbank Fund as president. That sort of thing. It's constant in and out. So who the heck is the Milbank Fund? Well, the Milbank Fund is wholly owned by the Borden Company, by the Borden people. Mr. Borden, Mr. Milbank, was the owner of the Borden Company. Okay? So it ties it up in a neat little package. So we have independent, objective, value-free research. Okay? Coming at the conclusion everybody, all the Borden competitors should be outlawed. Turn out to be Borden people. I told the story. There was a libertarian group about 10 years ago at Mount Sinai Medical School, which is a big shot medical school in New York. They asked me to lecture to the class on medicine and government. So I was talking about all this stuff about licensing. I never got to this little story about New York City, the Milbank Fund. So I was telling the kids, the libertarian kids afterwards, I said, gee, it's a great story and so forth. I wish I had time to tell it. I said, gee, Professor Walker, we're glad you didn't tell it, because everybody on the every professor in the community medicine department, which is what the course was given, every professor in the community medicine department and outside is on payroll in the Milbank Fund as of that moment. So this is just a little window, a microcosm of the way the world works, so to speak. Okay.
How do we stop it?
How do we stop it? Well,
That's not for discussion.
No, that's the next course or whatever. It's sort of like the famous Clifford Odets play in the 30s, the comedy play where they wind up and everybody in the audience, everybody on the stage is shouting at the audience, the last final act, strike, strike! Everybody's supposed to rush out and strike.
We just recently had a situation here where illegal chicken production was being clamped down on. And when I read the article in the paper about these farmers, they had, up till now, they'd been able to sell their chickens, mainly to lodges and things like that used a large volume throughout the year. And obviously pressure was put on the lodges by government, and they no longer will accept shipment, and these farmers have no way to get their chickens to market, and they don't have licenses for growing chickens. But I was so incensed, the thing I wanted to do was start an illegal chicken buying co-op. You know, I'd go door to door in a truck selling illegal chicken. Illegal chicken.
It's monstrous.
Illegal chickens.
It reminds me
it's everywhere.
Yeah, in Virginia. My wife comes from Virginia, so I know something about the Virginia society. Everybody, they love country ham. Okay, if you know what country ham is, it's very different. It's very salty and it's flaky and all that. And everybody has got their own little country ham, their favorite country ham, their Mrs. Window down the road or something. There's little teeny little smokehouses which smoke ham. And they're all slightly different, they all got different wood or whatever it is, and everybody likes their, I like Mrs. Wilson's ham, you know, I like Porter's ham, sort of. So, what happened is the goddamn government, I think it was the state government, because of the larger meat packers or something, started outlawing these little, they're unsafe, they don't meet OSHA requirements, and started outlawing these little smoked ham houses.
That's right, they're not
monstrous.
kosher.
Pardon?
They're not kosher.
They're not kosher. And it's just monstrous. These poor people love this as quarters ham. You have to eat armor or whatever it is. So,
The Lubavitch was on them, yeah. That's right.
Right. So anyway, that's an enormous amount of stuff like that. So it's kind of fascinating because that's the real problem of monopoly. Okay, any more about monopoly? Because I want to see. I guess when's the next break before we have?
Yeah, next 15 minutes.
Because I want to get to the macro stuff. And so, any more about micro or competition? Yeah.
Well, back to the cost curve.
Yeah.
The other analysis is sometimes presented as a cost curve that is continually downsloping throughout the whole range of what would be bought by the public, and therefore it will only have one firm. Therefore, we want to grant monopoly so that they can get the best average cost.
Grant monopoly.
Yeah.
Well, what can you say? I mean, presumably what happened that way on the market is really the most efficient way of doing it. I can't think of any really natural monopoly.
Well, the answer to that is complete, of course, and that is that if the economies of scale really do produce lower costs, then why do they need a legal monopoly?
Exactly.
Because they're going to be lower costs anyway.
And achieve it on the market precisely. That merge into
so it's going to achieve in the marketplace, so they don't need to make it a legalized monopoly.
Precisely.
But of course, all these smooth cost curves are crazy, really, because I mean, if somebody adds one extra machine to produce one more, then the cost is going to go up, so you're going to get sort of a U-shape there. And then maybe a U-shape is going to have two horizontal parts to it.
Right, have jagged
U-shapes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure, it could be a whole bunch of U's.
Jagged or whatever, you know, and the cost can start increasing as you go along.
Right. Which is, by the way, much more realistic than the smooth curve arc thing. If you have a whole bunch of horizontals, a whole bunch of, you don't know where the heck you are. That's essentially what's going on. Right? You never know whether you're in a horizontal part or a flowing part or whatever. Yeah, that's absolutely true. There's I can't think of any really so-called natural monopoly at all. We used to be considered the telephones were a natural monopoly. You have to have one company because otherwise you have 20 phones and all that sort of stuff. And it turns out, even that was wrong. Even in the old days, before the current technology, that it wasn't really true anyway. And I forget now what the answer was to that. Even 100 years ago, that wasn't really true. And now, of course, with additional satellites and microwave and all that, you've got capacity to collaborate in the same cable, so that you don't have to. You can have a whole bunch of different phone companies all using the same common cable.
Well, you know what I really found interesting is that just in the past few years, when they've let private companies sell telephones on the market, it's incredible how much the technology has improved.
Yeah.
In fact, it came to the point that I have a small telephone that you just lay onto the table. It doesn't have a base or anything like that. Basically, it just has a cord that goes to the wall, and this thing is like, what was it? I think it was like $12 at the very, very most. Belch used to charge like hundreds of dollars practically for this kind of equipment. And not only that, they're coming up with cordless. I mean, the cordless telephones are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And if you think, if they had let that go a long time ago, we probably wouldn't have cable juggles. They would have had transmitters in neighborhoods. Yeah. And I've heard people complain about then people would be monitoring the telephone messages. But think about let's say a telephone. They don't really have telephone lines generally from, let's say, London, Ontario to Toronto. They have microwave transmitters. And I know people who have set up equipment so that they can monitor the microwave transmitter. I mean, we were not really. That's I think one of the easiest things to convince people I found is that you're really not protected.
It's like the mobile telephones. You got the city of Toronto. You got 3 channels. There's 2 other people in the city that want to talk on their car phone. You don't get on. And now they open it up, and the cellular radio is supposed to be here in a year or so. Every single person in Toronto could have a mobile phone, and still wouldn't crowd the thing out. And less money, of course.
Yeah, it's great. Super. The whole data interconnect industry is a feature of that, allowing competition.
The other thing about monopolies, though, and particularly in the area of what people consider to be natural monopolies like that, you wouldn't want to string all those lines, and if they didn't want to cooperate, they couldn't share the cable, is that we're thinking about telephones in a conventional sense, as opposed to means of communication in a broader sense, and means of communication as opposed to food, shelter, or all the other choices in the market. When in Austrian economics, is that addressed sufficiently? That there's no such thing as a monopoly for your dollars?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, we're the only ones who stress it. Because everybody else, again, this goes back to the whole discussion we had about what's a good. The antitrust economists would say, well, you look at the industry consists of 5 firms, it's gear shifts or whatever, and it's a terrible thing, only 5 firms are producing 80% of the gear shifts, therefore the monopolists can break them up. If you widen the definition of what the use is, you have all sorts of different 2,000 firms. The concentration ratio is much lower. So it all depends on how narrow you make the concentration. The so-called concentration ratio is one of the big things in antitrust people. It's a terrible thing for 5 firms, or the top 3 firms, or whatever, to have more than X percent of what's arbitrary of the sales. And simply, just widen or narrow the definition of what the good is. You can make a very narrow good. You can have, for example, of course, Wonder Bread is a total monopoly on Wonder Bread. Nobody else can produce Wonder Bread. Anybody else that does it is interfering with the property rights. Okay? So break it up. Wonder Bread is 100% of the bread market, Wonder Bread market. However,
It's pretty sad.
it's a monstrous thing. Then if you stretch it a little bit to white bread, you get a whole bunch of stuff. Then you can stretch it more to rye and pumpernickel and rolls and bagels. So the concentration is purely a result of your definition of an economist. And they all compete, of course. Everything competes with the consumer dollar. Well, for example, there's a vacation market, okay, for people going on vacation. Hotels compete with each other. They also compete with other hotels. They all compete with yacht cruises, Caribbean cruises. They also compete with airline travel to other places. There's a whole bunch of
Conventions.
Yeah, right. A whole bunch of stuff that's competing with driving, hotel trips and all that sort of stuff. So, so that's one of the insights. The insights of the Austrians. So, I should say something also about cartels. Somebody mentioned about cartels. I think I'm getting together. Generally, I think it's a general truth. This, I think, is accepted by other free market people in Austria. Is that cartels don't work except with government intervention. They cannot survive on a free market. And for 2 basic reasons. You have a bunch of people getting together. A very good friend of mine is a coin dealer. He said every once in a while, every once in a while, coin dealers get together and say, let's jack up the price. And let's agree and so forth and so on. And he says somebody always breaks the agreement. Somebody goes out there and cuts price by 10% in order to pick up sales, or the other suckers and haven't cut the price. And you're back to the race, he says. Constantly happens. And I venture to say there's not a single cartel in the history of the world which existed in a free market for any length of time. It's constantly breaking down. Either because the internal firms tremendous pressure now. Let's say they have to cut production in order to raise price. They won't agree to that. It's one of the difficult things. They agree, okay, we'll cut production by 10%, cut freight shipments or whatever it happens to be. We'll agree to this, and then we'll raise the price by 20%, and we'll be better off. Okay? And so what happens then is everybody sits there and says, if I can secretly cut the price, okay, I can pick up enormous amount, because it's now 20% higher than the old price cut. Boy, it's fantastic. They start secret price cutting. And one of the interesting things, one of the first things is the Clayton Act, the Antitrust Act, outlawed was secret price cutting. In the name of enforcing competition. Let's never have anything secret. Everything's got to be public. Of course, that means you can't break the cartel.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's unfair competition.
That's unfair competition, secretly price cut. Secret price cutting is a magnificent way by which the market smashes the cartel.
In that equation, though, in a free market, companies could get together and form a cartel,
Sure.
and then the contracts they make should be upheld by law. But as long as they don't have the ability to forbid new entries into the market, someone else will step in too.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible that I think it's the Canadian government that's complaining about water being dumped on the Canadian market. I wonder who's really complaining about water being dumped onto the Canadian market.
Bill Davis, no, it might be another incident, but Bill Davis is telling people not to buy lattes these days. And I don't think it's
buy latte ever anyway, but nevertheless, that's not.
every now and again someone starts complaining about the Japanese dumping steel.
Yeah, to a Japanese.
But I
Or
figure if the Japanese can make steel cheaper, then we should buy it. Or we can make steel cheaper too. I mean, what is it, supernatural?
Yeah.
They got more, what they got is modern
Genetically
mills and
different.
computerized equipment and stuff. They have old steel mills.
Yeah, right.
That's the problem.
I think it'd be a great thing if all the foreign countries decide that give us their production free, you know, undercut our American products, and we get all this stuff free.
Great.
It'd be magnificent. Nobody have to work. Right? Nobody sees something.
For a very short period of
Oh
time.
yeah, I'm willing to wait for the short period of time to see what happens. It's another thing. I remember back in the 50s when Germany had compulsory cartel. Germany pioneered the welfare state, the warfare state under Bismarck and everything else. And it pioneered compulsory cartel. Every steel firm was forced to join a steel cartel, etc. Restrict production, raise price, have a high tariff to keep them out. So after World War II, the Erhard regime eliminated that and eliminated compulsory cartels. So the argument of the old cartelists was this, I get this, they said we need compulsory cartels because if we don't have compulsory cartels, then one big firm will then take over and outcompete everybody, drive everybody to the wall, and be monopolistic. Right? So in other words, what they were saying is, let's just even assume that happens. Let's say one big steel firm finally merges after 20 years and they're more efficient. But the cartelist is saying is we have to crush efficient, we have to have impose cartels, but we have to worry about possible future efficient monopolies and impose instead, in order to guard against that, impose inefficient compulsory monopolies right now. That's the argument. Totally insane. I mean, I can see why anybody would fall for that argument. It just beats me.
Well, the biggest example of proof of the efficiency of competition is my watch here. You know, I mean, the same as everyone else's watch in the room. It's got a computer inside it that's more powerful than the first electronic computer produced by IBM back in 1950 or whatever it was. It cost $1 million.
Fantastic.
And the chip in here is, you know, cost $1. Yeah, I think so. $2 that price.
That's great.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah,
and yet if you get
cost to produce.
Pardon?
How much does it cost to produce? That's the amazing thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the amount of competition there is. I mean, there's calculators for what, $10 now?
Less.
And the slide rule used to cost that much, which is a piece of wood with some marks on it.
Right.
That's what a slide rule is.
You remember the old calculating machines? When I was going to college, they had these massive calculating machines. Frieden, I think, one, and Burroughs, whatever.
Big Monroe's.
Yeah, Monroe.
Called abacus.
Yeah, you'd be pounding away in this thing, and then only slightly faster than your own pen and pencil.
You know what you said about the early four-function calculators costing $400?
Yeah.
Okay, when I first saw one, I bought one. I only paid $100 for it, I figured I was smart and making one price.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I went down. I went to Simpsons, which is just about a mile from here. And I bought it in this room, and I bought it in this room full of calculators and writing machines. And the guy who sold it to me, the salesman, I'll never forget this. He figured out the sales tax on a paper bag. It's a room full of calculators.
Yeah. The old and tried, trusted and true way.
It's just like that old comic strip, they'll do it every time.
Yeah, that's right. Is it still true that an abacus can beat a computer? And we used to say abacus could beat
Calculator.
calculator. Can you beat a calculator? Really?
Yeah, I saw that on some TV show. It lost its division, but it beat them both.
But that is matching the top operator
Yeah.
in one place to
Right.
the average operator in
Right.
another, generally.
Right.
So I used to do competitions like that for the old comptometer against electronic calculators. But once people get good at operating, they can beat out
Mary
the...
used to work for Victor, by the way, so she's got nice.
I heard you say, Victor.
What's a comptometer?
Comptometer is a full keyboard machine
It's an adding machine.
Yeah.
with no functions in it except adding.
Yeah,
But you learn to add, subtract, multiply, and divide by adding.
Yeah. I think it was.
And
That's before the-
comptometer
okay.
operators used to just practically the corner of the market on doing audits and things like that.
Right.
You probably know.
Talking about competition, because I was just looking for it, I can't find it. Anyone remember that cartoon at the back of Reason? It must have been about a year or so ago about the antitrust people, you know, and in their office they were saying, well, we've broken up all the big companies, what's there to do? Go out of business, don't be silly, we've got to look for some more monopolies. And so they look for a market on the corner, and they see this little sort of grocery store on the corner and say, that's a market on the corner, and that's got a corner on the market. It's a monopoly. So they broke it up, so there's Mama's grocery store and Papa's grocery store next door to each other, and the last frame of it is a couple from a socialist company coming on looking at it and saying, how wasteful, 2 grocery stores next to each other. Look at the inefficiencies of capitalism. So stupid.
Actually, we can break unless there's something else you want to cover.
No, that's good natural, right? Okay, I think this is the last chunk of this mammoth seminar. And a lot of people ask me, well, am I going to cover this, that, and the other thing? I think maybe I'm going to try to get the opinion of the people here. What topics would you like to have covered? There's all sorts of topics. This is sort of a macro area. Yeah.
Business cycles.
I don't know. Inflation?
Likely scenarios over the next 5 to 10 years.
How to make a million in the commodity market.
It's not my...
Have I got a seminar for you?
Yeah, it's a different seminar.
What was that one?
Make a million in the commodities market.
Anybody else? Somebody asked for but
Easy. Start with 100 million.
somebody asked to discuss unemployment.
Can you discuss the printing of money?
Yeah, that would be inflation. Sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just alternatives to that possibility.
Alternatives to printing money. Nice supply. I have a new book that just came out, by the way, which of course I strongly recommend, called The Mystery of Banking, which is published by Richardson and Snyder, distributed through Dutton. Okay, so you can get it from Dutton.
Liberty Library will have it available.
Liberty Library, great. Super.
He was staring me down there. Where's your salesman?
Okay. Excuse me. Okay, I think it doesn't like the same stuff in here, please.
Unemployment and deflation.
Beg pardon?
Unemployment and deflation. The failure of the full employment.
Okay. Thank you. Income. I think one of the interesting things is the history of business cycle, how this thing starts. There's an interesting book by Wesley Mitchell, which I don't endorse, but there's some interesting stuff in there called Business Cycle of a Problem and Its Setting. It came out in 1927. And talked about, reported on another investigation by an English economic historian named W.R. Scott. And Scott went back, way back to the 16th century, 15th century, and looked at business annals. In other words, went to all the financial pages and memoirs and whatever, trying to figure out the state of business activity. What was things depressed, or they prosperous, or whatever. Essentially, he found something like this. Oh, there it is. Okay, essentially something like this. Business system, the market activity, there were markets that were much more limited than they came later. Okay, so fine then. So something like that. They go along an even keel, and then something would happen. The king confiscated half the gold in the kingdom, so there's a big depression. Or there's a war, and so there's a big stimulus, or war cuts off trade, and big depression, something like that. So what you have are isolated instances where something happens to the business activity where it's clear to everybody what the cause was. Almost always the government, right? War, or sometimes a famine or something like that. Mostly the king confiscates. Kings often confiscated money because they didn't have much money. They confiscated it. So there was no business cycle. It was things sort of pegged along more or less evenly, and then suddenly something happened. But these are exogenous causes. It's called. In other words, outside the market. So these were not anything cyclical, not anything that seems to come from within the market. Nothing scary in a sense of how come this is happening. Then around 1750, to be very, very vague about it, starting really in England and continuing, then spreading in the United States later in that late 18th century, early 19th, in Western Europe, there began to be curious situations of regular type wave-like fluctuations in business activity, something like this. And this is peculiar because there didn't seem to be any specific cause which you can identify and say, okay, this is due to the war, this is due to the king confiscated something, this is due to a famine or a drought. It seemed to come from within the business or market system. And two things happen at the same time. Two mighty institutional changes. One, the Industrial Revolution, so there's around the mid-18th century, so that the market economy spreads and you have industrialization. And at the same time, the banking system pops up. Fractional reserve banking system comes up. Starting with the Bank of England in 1690, and then spreading to other countries in the mid-18th century. So in other words, the rise of the banking system starts at about the same time as the Industrial Revolution. And ever since then, those economists are trying to investigate the causes of the business cycle. Why is this? Break down into two different broad schools of thought. Those who blame the market economy and or the Industrial Revolution, and those who blame the banking system. Both coincidental. In other words, this is one of the problems of correlation does not prove causation. Three things happen at the same time. It could be one or the other or both or neither, whatever. So these are the broad, there's those who blame the industrial market economy, and those who blame the banks, money and banking. Now, within the industrial market economy, there are also some different subdivisions, and et cetera. One of the first ones is the famous sunspot theory, which Stanley Jevons, a distinguished economist in microfield, stubbed his toe in the macrofield. The theory was that in those days, the theory was a big crisis. People were really worried about the crisis. They weren't worried about the boom, they were worried about the crisis. Why is there a sudden collapse? Collapse of credit, collapse of banks, prices fall, unemployment occurs, bankruptcies, etc., etc. So it was a theory at one point that every 9.5 years or something, this thing pops up, crisis. Therefore, it must be due to sunspots.